exactly. And this is why I've been struggling to understand America's thinking strategy. Successive governments in America have identified as China as the main competitor, the main threat for USA, whether it was Obama with his pivot to Asia, or then Trump came along threatening China. Biden's been the same, and yet somehow instead of concentrating on that main challenge that they have. Somehow, they've started wars in against Russia in Ukraine and pushed Russia closer to China. They've started all of this stuff in the Middle East, threatened Iran, pushed them closer to China. Even Saudi Arabia, they're pushing closer to China. At the same time, while they're doing all of this, they're weakening their own resources. They've kind of run out of weapons to even supply to Ukraine and Israel.
Right.
So how are they actually? What is the thinking? I was thinking maybe is it because there's so many lobby groups in the USA, and every one of them sees a different enemy, a paranoia against Russia, Iran. Everyone has their own, and whichever one kind of on a given day, whichever one comes um, good, the government just seems to go that way. But I think what you said about like a dying mule, I think that kind of explains it maybe a little bit
Hmm.
better because they I think I'm trying too hard to come up with a strategy for USA. They don't have one. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have, it's not, there aren't these rooms where they sit. I mean, they do sit around, they do have meetings, but it's always about the immediate. It's always
Yes.
about, right? It's not, there's not these rooms with the big maps on the walls and they're all in these leather chairs and they're thinking, okay, what do we do about, right? Twiddling their fingers and what are we going to do about, Asia? Okay, here's the 5-year plan and we're going various departments have those types of things,
Mm.
but they're not important in the sense that the policy is made by those who are in the White House
Yes.
and also at the cabinet levels. And so, you had this, I can't remember who wrote it, but a number of years ago said, if these 25 people didn't exist, the Iraq war wouldn't have happened. Right.
Mm.
So taking the stance of the Iraq war, that wasn't something that came from the inertia, the institutions of the empire. That was a decision made by the Bush administration and specifically a handful of people,
Yes.
right? Maybe not even 24. Maybe it was
Yes.
less than 25, right? I mean, so I think if you step back and you say, okay, this is an empire, and they have an imperial mindset, and then of course with that you have you can kind of look at it cleanly in the sense of course, the empire is always going to have to at least maintain itself, if not expand. And this is seen clearly when George Kennan, who very famous American diplomat, he's the one who authored this containment strategy against the Soviet Union. He also was very public against the expansion of NATO in the 1990s as well. But in the late 40s, Kennan writes a memorandum to President Truman, and he says, "Look, Mr. President, the United States possesses more than 55% of the world's wealth, and we have less than 5% of the world's population. It will be the duty and obligation of every successive administration to continue that inequality, to continue that imbalance, right? So you have that imperial need.
Yeah.
The idea that an empire it's a living organism in its own right. So there is that inertia there. And I go back to what John Steinbeck wrote in The Grapes of Wrath about the banks, about how they are a living organism and they have to continue to grow, how corporations and banks have to continue to grow or they will die.
Yes.
And there's reality to that, right? If you look at how shareholders, stock owners are the most important things for the decision making of corporations. Corporations have to show they grow, otherwise their shareholders get very upset, and that causes, right? I mean, so you could see that phenomena actually on display in how things actually work. So, I mean, with that clear, kind of clean idea of imperial mindset, you can have a better appreciation, I think, for why and how the United States chooses to do things at times. But however, that's not the end of it. You have the corruption that you were talking about. You have the corruption of the weapons industries, of the banks, the fossil fuel companies, lobbies like the Israel lobby
Yes.
that are able to purchase policies and budget from our federal government. So the influence is massive. So you already have an imperial mindset, but that is exaggerated, exacerbated, and reinforced by these institutions that benefit from more aggressive and more hawkish and more warlike imperial policies, right? So you have a corruption that rots the already rotten imperial mindset. And then the third thing, to make it even more complicated, and this is why it's never a simple explanation,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right? It always takes me time to do this, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk like this. The third explanation is that the United States is a democracy. It's not a very good one. We've got our
Yes.
problems. We got Donald Trump as president. How good a democracy can we be, right? But we are a democracy, and it is a two-party system, and that the idea of domestic politics still comes into play. Right. And so you see things like Karl Rove, George W. Bush's advisor in 2001, 2002, saying to Bush and to all the Republicans, war is good politics. Wartime commanders in chief get reelected. Right. You see that when Obama comes in office.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode.
David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel, Axelrod, Obama's chief strategist, and Rahm Emanuel, his chief of staff, saying to him, Mr. President, drone strikes will make you look strong. And then when the debate about surging the war in Afghanistan, escalating the war in Afghanistan, which Obama didn't believe in at all, he's confronted with Mr. President, if you start drawing troops out of Afghanistan and a bomb goes off in Times Square, you're not going to win re-election in 2012, right? But there's also the counter to that when wars go bad, foreign wars have a domestic political cost, right? So you see that in 2006, you see that's why Barack Obama gets elected, because of the Iraq War. That's why he defeats Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primaries. That's why he defeats war hero John McCain in 2008. That's why George W. Bush signs the status of a forces agreement with the Iraqis in 2008 that says we are getting out of the Iraq War, right? Because that's Bush's attempt to try and get the Iraq War out of the 2008 election. Other reasons as well. I mean, that war had been lost. We had to get out of it, et cetera, et cetera. But that is a prime factor. So you have the reality of empire, how empires have always been, that imperial mindset. You have the corruption of the American system. And then you have the domestic politics as well that go back and forth as to being, yes, we want to go to war. 2 or 3 years later, that was the worst thing we ever did. I mean, you look at public polling. Look, I just saw something the other day. In early 2003, in the run-up to the American invasion of Iraq, you had, and British invasion. I don't want to leave you guys out either. You had public opinion polls between 70 and 80% of Americans were supportive of the invasion of Iraq. There's a poll done in the last year or so that more than 50% of Americans say they opposed the Iraq War in 2003, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's statistically impossible. But you have that, and you can see that wars are very popular to begin with, but when the moral weight of the war, when the lies are exposed, when the cost of it, then the public very often turns against that. You can see that in Korea, you can see that in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, the same trajectory in the public opinion. And politicians are sensitive to that. The empire is sensitive to that. And that's why you've seen a change in American imperial, American war making since the second half of the Obama administration to be indirect, to be proxy wars, or to be silent wars, right? Using CIA and special operations and drones, because or using contractors, mercenaries, because the political costs to war are too much for the empire. So, unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to say it's just this, because it's not. And there's other aspects of this as well. Then when you get involved with Israel, that kind of turns a traditional model of an empire upside down. And why does the United States even have this interest in Israel? Well, it's because the American empire takes over from the British Empire. The British Empire was very clear about its interest in Palestine and then Israel. The Governor General of Jerusalem in forget what year it was, and sometime in the 1930s, he says that our purpose here is to build a loyal Jewish Ulster in the midst of a potentially hostile sea of Arabs. So Palestine and Israel for the British was always about having that colonial presence in a very important region of the world, very important for multiple reasons, but particularly say in the 20s and 30s with as industrialization was rapidly occurring, had been occurring before, but particularly the need for oil was so much greater beginning in the 20s. Having that loyal Jewish Ulster in the Middle East made a lot of imperial sense. For the Americans now, it really doesn't. The strategic benefits of Israel are just not there. But again, you can't. So if you just took it from the imperial mindset, you would think that the American empire would say, we don't need Israel. It's strategically a drag on us. It causes us problems. We don't even have bases there.